It's often exciting to look to the future of UNO, what it might be like in times to come. Sometimes, though, it's important to stop and take a good look at the past of the university, the people and the happenings that help make the excitement of future history possible. With this in mind, join me for Reflections in Time. Dr. Robert D. Harper joined the Municipal University of Omaha faculty in the year 1948. He came as an assistant professor of English. He became an associate professor in 1951, professor in 1957, and dean of the College of Arts and Sciences in 1960. He has a bachelor's degree from the University of Denver and a Master of Arts and Doctor of Philosophy degrees from the University of Chicago. Dr. Harper served the university as dean of the College of Arts and Sciences. Then he stepped down, saying, "After 10 years, administration's my second interest. I want to return to my first love, teaching and research." His research interests are Western American literature and the American drama. Dr. Harper's professional affiliations include the Modern Language Association, Western Literature Association, and National Council of Teachers of English. He's also been affiliated with the Nebraska Arts Council, the Omaha Metropolitan Arts Council, the English-Speaking Union, Joslin Liberal Arts Society, and the Omaha Historical Society. Dr. Harper, Robert, Bob, it's nice to have you here so we can visit a bit about the past.
Well, it's nice to be here.
Bob, I'm quite sure some of the friends who might be looking at this tape have known you well and long, but perhaps many of them didn't know some of the background that Bob Harper brought with him when he came to the University of Omaha in that 1948 year that I mentioned a moment ago. Where all did you stem from, and what was some of your background, both professionally and academically, before you came to the university?
Well, I was brought up in Colorado and finished my undergraduate studies in the middle of the Depression, and didn't do too much for the first couple of years because there wasn't too much to do, and returned to graduate school in 1937 in Chicago, and after a couple of years of graduate work, I had my first teaching job up in Michigan at Michigan Tech, mining school in northern Michigan,
yes.
and taught there until the war caught up with me in 1942, and then spent 3 years in the Second World War, mostly out in the Pacific, in the North Pacific Ocean, and then came back and finished my graduate school, and came to Omaha in 1948, and the job at the University of Omaha was actually my second full-time academic job.
Do you remember how you heard about a job here at the university? Did they contact you? Did you hear there was an opening? How did it happen?
No, this was just a very simple procedure. I just went to the placement office at the University of Chicago, where they had listed all of the open positions that they knew about, and looked through these long lists of open positions. This was a year in the post-war student boom when there were many, many academic positions open. So you could have a choice. I didn't want to go east. I'd been brought up in the west, and I wanted to go somewhere west of Chicago. And this position interested me mainly because it offered an opportunity to teach American literature, which was my specialty. Most of the beginning positions were confined to such things as composition and fields of that sort, but this was in the field that I was most interested in, and since I could teach American literature, and I had known a little bit about Omaha. I'd visited it, but I knew that it was considered a very nice Midwestern city that seemed to be making some progress. It seemed like it might be a decent place to live.
1948, the year you came here, was a rather historic year.
It was a very historic year for this campus, because this was the year that Dr. Mabel L took over as president. He came here the same fall that I did, and there were, as I recall, 17 of us, I think, altogether, who were in the what he used to refer to as the freshman class of 19 1948, and of course he was to exert, as everyone knows, a tremendous influence on the university during the next 20 years, and so this was really the beginning of a new era in this university.
1948, an unusual year, as you mentioned. You came here, lots of other people came here. When you say 17 people, that was a sizable number of people on a faculty that was really quite small totally,
yes,
wasn't
the total faculty was less than 70. But you see, this was a boom year. This was the year when the enrollment of the veterans was beginning to peak out, and the enrollment in the university had more than doubled since the war days, and so we were experiencing a very sharp increase in student enrollment, and that was what accounted for the large faculty increase. Most of those new faculty people, as I recall, were additions rather than replacements.
I was wondering, they were not replacements.
3 or 4 of them, I believe, would be replacements. Most of them were additions simply to take care of the very rapidly growing student body.
Speaking of the rapid growth that you just have emphasized there, about how large was the student body?
Well, the official figure, as I recall, in the fall I came was 1,900, which was double what the figure had been before the war in 1940.
Yes. Now, you came here, as you said, in 1948. The faculty was small, and yet you told me, as we visited a while ago, that the English department, of which you were a part, was a sizable department in a comparative way.
Well, there were 7 of us, and it was sizable because English was the course that was required of all freshmen, and most of the English faculty spent most of their time teaching freshman English. There wasn't too much time to teach the few more advanced courses that we offered.
So you were really fortunate to have the position which evidently attracted you, where you could teach your specialty.
Well, I could teach, I taught some freshman English, of course, we all did, but I also taught a couple of courses in my specialty, which I could not have done in a large university with that preparation. I hadn't had enough experience.
Now, if you can recall, Bob, going back to 1948, some of your first impressions of, let's say, Omaha, a new home for you and your family, and this campus. It was, I imagine, quite different from the years you remember when you left.
Omaha impressed me as a fairly small city because the 2 cities I had lived most of my early life in, Denver and Chicago, were larger cities. And Omaha did not impress me as a large city. It impressed me as a nice city. I was surprised that it was such a neat and clean city compared to some I'd been in the East. The university impressed me most because it was the only one-building campus that I'd ever seen up to that time. We had this one large building, which, of course, is the present administration building, still called the administration building, although administration is the process moving out of it. Everything was contained in that single building. Most of the campus was just weed lot. Had not been developed at all. And the attitude was that there was enough space out here to take care of any future needs that might be anticipated.
And I imagine that was the general thing. It seemed very big, I imagine, since you were housed totally almost in that one building. Yes. Drama, sports, everything took place in that building, didn't it?
Yes, the present University Theater was a combination gymnasium and auditorium. It had movable seats and a flat floor. And they used it about half-time for gym classes and basketball games, and the other half of the time for convocations and student meetings and so forth by simply pulling the folding chairs in and out. And it had a shallow stage at one end, which has since, of course, been greatly enlarged. And they had the dramatic performances, such as they were in there, too. Everything was in that one room, which today seems like a fairly small theater.
Yes. Now, what you've emphasized here really is while they were growing rapidly, they had 1,900 students when you came. It was, of course, in a comparison to 1979, when you and I are recording this program, quite a small university, certainly. But I imagine there were things about it at that time that, if you can remember them, impressed you. Smallness, yes, but there probably were some different things, different qualities that probably we may have lost or changed in some ways as the bigness and the years rolled along. What are some of the things that you remember in that very early time?
Well,
let's say about your Department of English and the way you
thing I
operated.
liked about it best was that the faculty was small enough so you could know almost everybody on the entire faculty. You did know almost everybody on the entire faculty. You weren't departmentalized. You weren't confined just to knowing the people in your department. But the best thing about it was that you had this close relationship with the students, which became impossible later because of the large numbers and the impersonality and the formalities and so forth. And it was a small, informal institution where you knew your students and your faculty colleagues very well indeed. And in some ways, it was more pleasant to teach in a condition of that sort than in the large university that it is now.
About what was the normal class size, let's say, for an upper division class?
Well, the class size really hasn't changed too much over the years. My first upper division classes had around between 15 and 20 students once in a while. I think I had one class of 25 in the first year.
Well, you mentioned a moment ago that you felt there was a closeness to students, that some of which was lost as the years went along. Was that because of counseling and other activity? If class size was the same, I wondered what made you indicate that we felt closer to the students.
Well, it's because of student attitudes. Students were more dependent on faculty in those days. They had less of this independent attitude. They had been brought up in closely knit families. In other words, they were old-fashioned by the standards of today's students. Today's students wouldn't understand them. They felt they needed the faculty, and they often came to the faculty for kinds of help that very few students today would come voluntarily to it. It wasn't so much the ratio of faculty to students as the different attitudes that students had in those days.
You mean mainly the difference then was on the student's part, that he or she...
Basically, yes.
Because of the background and time.
I would say certainly so.
Yeah. Now, as you think of 48, 50, 51, in that general early period when you and Dr. Bale and 17 others started here, in general, what was the academic climate like? We had mainly the one college, didn't we, at that time?
There were two colleges. The Arts and Sciences College was by far the larger of the two.
Oh, yeah.
And everything else, everything that didn't fit in Arts and Sciences was in the Applied Arts College. There were two deans, William Thompson of the Arts and Sciences College and Carl Helmstadter of the Applied Arts. Applied Arts included mostly business, engineering, and home economics. A few other smaller departments, I think, were in it, but journalism was in it, but journalism was a one-man department at that time.
Now, with the two colleges set up, where did things like future teachers, where did they reside?
Oh, the education department was in the College of Arts and Sciences. It was a regular department within the Arts and Sciences College.
When you began here, and in those first years, what was your general impression of the academic quality of both the faculty and the student body here? You'd had other experiences, both professionally and as a student yourself, otherwise.
Well, I was surprised first at the fairly large number of very competent faculty members. The faculty members had doctorates from very distinguished universities, many of them, and thought they did very well. On the other hand, I felt that the quality of the students was fairly low, a good deal lower than it is today. Whether this is because the high schools weren't doing as well in those days, or because so many Omaha families were sending their children to Lincoln and elsewhere, and out of state and places like that, but we seemed to get what was left over. We seemed to get the students whose families didn't want to or couldn't afford to send their children to more prestigious universities. You see, we were a small municipal university and fairly new. The university only went back to 1930 as a public university, and another 20 years beyond that as a little private college. And I don't think it had really developed a reputation yet, anywhere nearly what it has today.
Now, in that early period, in your first years here, I imagine there were people, both students and perhaps more so your colleagues, that stand out in your memory. Who are some of the people that really held the place together, that were strong enough? You mentioned Dr. Bale, you mentioned Dean Thompson. Perhaps there are others, and maybe there's some things about them you could share here.
Well, the person that impressed me by far the most was the man who hired me, Dr. Ralph Wardle. He already had achieved distinction in his field, and he was only 40.
He'd been here about 10 years when you came, hadn't he?
He had published a number of articles in a book at that time, and I was extremely pleased to have a department chairman of his caliber, and he was the man who impressed me most. Another person who impressed me very much was the head librarian, Miss Ellen Lord, who was a very brilliant librarian. She knew everything you could know about that library, and she was one of the first people I got to know well here on the faculty. Then there was Alice Smith, who was at that time the registrar, and a very competent registrar. Among the senior faculty members, I suppose the first one outside of my department that I might have been impressed with was Dr. Wilfred Payne, who was the only philosophy professor on the faculty at that time. He was the Department of Philosophy, and he also directed a humanities program, and he was a very interesting conversationalist, a man of rather broad talents. These are some of the people that I was impressed with in the very first year I came, as I recall it. And then there are others, of course, who came along year after year that I got to know very well. Paul Beck was one of them, was one of the fine history teachers that I got well acquainted with in my early years here.
How did the university, this is a rather general question, but you can take it any place you'd like, how did it operate? It was small then, relatively small. The faculty was fairly small. The student body was a couple of thousand students or so. Did you operate a lot differently then than we do in the 1970s?
The biggest difference was that nothing was computerized. There were no computers. Every single record was made out by hand and filed by hand, if you can imagine that. The registration cards were large white cards. There was spaces to write your program in them, and they were handwritten. The students wrote their own registration cards. The registrar had 2 or 3 file clerks in there who filed all the records, and the grades were actually put on the student records by hand, because it was a little quicker perhaps than typing, and there were no it was a long time before we got into computers. Actually, it wasn't until around 1960 that we began to get into computerized record keeping. And
really, all through the 50s, everything was done as it had been done for
pretty much so. There were very, very few changes. There were a few innovations, but it's amazing how primitive the methods of record keeping and filing were in the registrar's office, in the departments, everywhere.
It was primitive, as you suggest, but in some ways, wasn't that a part of the closeness, too?
Oh, yes.
Everything was tangibly touched by hands, practically, wasn't it?
Oh, sure. Sure, you could, there were advantages as well as disadvantages.
Now, before we leave that general period, you mentioned a number of the faculty colleagues, I think nearly all of whom I knew myself, too. But are there some other people, administrators at that time? There was President Bale. Were there some other people that helped run the university, financially and otherwise, that stand out in your memory?
Well, there were, it didn't take very many people to administer, and Dr. Bale did not have a habit of overloading the administration with useless jobs. The Financial Management University, of course, from the time I came here, was under the control of Charles Hoff, who was a very efficient financial manager. The faculty didn't always agree with him or always like him because he wasn't a faculty-type person, but he did the job, and he seemed to run the business office very efficiently and very effectively. And he had control. He was certainly the next to the president, the most influential person in the university because, well, he had purse strings. He was he ran the business. He was the treasurer and ran the business office. And some faculty members would have said he ran it with an iron hand. That he had too much power. But this was a controversial issue of the times.
Now, the administrative structure, we had the president, we had Charlie Hall.
We had the president,
and we had two deans.
We had the business manager, we had two deans, and then in 1952, 4 years after I came here, they added two more deans. They established the College of Business Administration with John Lucas as the dean, and the College of Education with Frank Gorman as the dean.
Now, beyond that level of the deans, we have various departments. The structure, let's go from that on down. That's changed in more recent years. You had, were there any assistant deans, people like that?
There were no assistant deans, and there was no feeling they were needed. The department chairmen reported to their respective deans, and the deans reported directly to the president. There were no other officers. There were no vice presidents at all, and the president did have a part-time assistant. One faculty member served a few hours a week as his personal assistant. That was Roderick Crane, who was also chairman of economics.
Now, so there was really only one step in the progression of hierarchy between the faculty person and the dean, and then really three between there and the president.
You had the department chairman,
yes,
the deans, and the president.
Yes.
There was no, there were no other layers of administration until after 1960, actually.
Did you like that arrangement, Robert?
I liked it for that size university. I wouldn't like it today because I wouldn't think it would be possible today.
Do you think that in those times it was a good way to operate and an easy way to get things done?
I think it was effective, yes. It seemed to work.
Now, moving into the, well, let's not move there quite yet. Let's stay in the academic atmosphere in which you first came here. Were you starting to notice any changes generally in the university there in the 50s after a few years? And if so, what were some of the changes you began to notice?
There were tremendous changes in the middle 50s. And the most important change that I think of in the middle 50s was a change in the quality of the students. The university began to gain more respect among the citizens of Omaha, and better students who formerly would have gone out of the city, mostly I suspect to Lincoln, for their education, decided this was a good place to come, and they tried to come here. And we had a number of students from 55 on who were awarded major fellowships for graduate work in various universities throughout the country as a result of their work here.
And this is one of the first times this had occurred?
Yes. And in the 40s, that would have been very, very rare indeed. I recall only maybe one case in the 40s where we had a student who achieved a major graduate fellowship. In the 50s, there were, there must have been 20 or more such students in various departments who achieved recognition for their scholarly achievement.
Now, do you think of any specific or general reasons why this might have happened other than what you've mentioned? Because you mentioned earlier when you came in 48, you were impressed, though it was small with a good, solid faculty. Was this just sort of a sign of the times? We were getting more of the students, or was there a reputation here that we just sort of grew naturally?
I think that what happened was that more of the townspeople, particularly the educated classes in Omaha, were becoming aware of this university. Part of the credit for this, of course, has to go to Mabel L. He went downtown and gave dozens and dozens of speeches to civics groups and women's clubs and various places like this, and made them aware that there was a university out here. You know, it had a rather nasty nickname among high school students who were chiding their classmates for coming here. They called it West Dodge High.
Yes,
for
yes.
many years, and
Yes.
the idea was that it wasn't much more than another high school, and this, of course, was never true, but at least it was a reputation that it had to live down, and I think by the middle of the 1950s, it was beginning to draw an entirely different class of student than it had drawn in the 40s.
And then, of course, into that period, the bootstrap program really grew and changed us too, didn't it?
The bootstrap program, as I recalled, got underway in the around 53, in there, and it, of course, helped tremendously because it brought people from all over the world, older students with worldly experience, military students who had been all over the world in here, and I think they, in a way, although they weren't all talented students, they were mostly very hard-working students. They knew what they wanted and what they were after, and they were here to finish their degrees off.
Highly motivated, generally.
As quick as they can. They're very highly motivated, and I think they had a generally favorable effect on the younger students who were forced to compete with them. Sometimes the students complained about having to compete with older people, but I think it was a generally good effect that they had.
Up until that time, the 50s, the 53, whatever the year was that really began, Bob, couldn't we be accused, if that's the right word to use, or at least be indicated that we were quite provincial in terms of the student
We were
body?
very provincial. Almost all the students in the university came from Omaha and its immediate environs.
But that, of course, is the reason why we basically existed as we began, right?
Mm-hmm.
But as time goes along with the bootstrap program and then with other things, we have become. And as you walk around in 1979 the campus, we can see a variety of foreign students and people from outstate and everything that's come since the merger. Do you think that part of that change is good? Do you think that's a good thing? Do you think we might have stayed and been strong just as we were?
I don't think there was any choice. The merger was necessary for better or worse. My own personal opinion is that it was for better, because there was no other way to continue to finance this university. The university was growing, its demands were becoming much greater, inflation was beginning to take over, and the only source of money outside of the student fees that we had was a very small mill levy. And twice in the 1960s, before the merger, of course, was completed in 68.
Yes.
And twice in the early 60s, the university attempted to increase its mill levy. It attempted to persuade the citizens of Omaha to increase their support for the university, and both of those attempts failed. So the only thing the university could do would be to simply stop any kind of growth or any kind of ambitions and simply struggle along as a very small, inconspicuous institution or attach itself to the state university. It didn't seem to us who were in on the merger that we had any other logical choice, really.
Do you recall those, you mentioned them, the two votes that the city was really asked, will you support us a little more heavily than you have? And in both cases, they said no. Do you recall, you were here during those years, why basically they said that? Why didn't they give us more support? In the long run, they gave it to us through state support, perhaps, but they didn't in this case.
Well,
they said no.
There was no consensus on that. There was no polling. Nobody really knew. That there was a suspicion among a lot of people who were supporters of the University of Omaha that the citizens felt that they had a sizable and pretty strong private university in the city, and they didn't need support to university. Of course, the fact that the private university was a denominational school, was a Catholic university, didn't seem to affect them much because a very large segment of the population were Catholics. And I think if it had not been for the presence of Creighton in the city, that there would have been a different attitude. But they said, well, after all, we have Creighton. do we need another large university here in the city of Omaha, even though one is a private and the other a public university? And I think maybe it was the feeling that this was too much to support that led them to this.
The merger itself, you were here during all the years where it began and where it took place. What are some of the significant things, the people that stand out in your memory that were heavily involved in consummating that merger, the important people and the unimportant ones? How did it, in your memory and from your vantage point, take place?
Well, the merger, of course, the merger movement was led really by the Omaha delegation to the unicameral. The Omaha delegation, of course, was something less than a third of the total membership of the unicameral, but they were the leaders and in this, and strangely enough, they had an ally in a very, very powerful outstate senator from the extreme West End, who apparently had been feuding with his colleagues, a man named Terry Carpenter, who was a power in the Senate and who was a supporter of the merger. The old Board of Regents, the University of Omaha, had a Board of Regents which was selected, of course, by the Omaha School Board under the old plan, and the president of the Board of Regents at the time of the merger was Robert Spire, and he happened personally to be very much in favor of the merger, and I think he did what he could to help. We just had a crisis in the university administration. A president of the university had been dismissed in the middle of his term, and another president, Kirk Naylor, had come in as an acting president.
Yes.
And I think that Dr. Naylor probably saw that the merger was the one way that he could solidify his position as well as the position of the campus here, because he worked very hard for it, and so did Mr. Spire. They did work hard for this merger, and they did get the cooperation of most of the Omaha senators. Most of the senators from Omaha did cooperate, but no one of them was as influential as this man from Scotts Bluff, who apparently had some reason. He possibly had a feud with the Lincoln campus and had some reason for wanting another university campus in the state.
It seemed like, to me, and I was a part of the campus at that time too, and from some of the things we heard in non-administrative circles probably, that it went so rapidly. In some campuses, in some states, mergers take an orderly progression over a great number of years. That was not the case here, Bob. For whatever reasons, and you might want to share some of them as you see them, why did that happen? Why did it happen so rapidly?
Well, I attended a number of the legislative hearings on this merger, most of which took place in the spring of 1967. 67 was the year the merger movement started. It was consummated, I think it was midsummer, the 1st of July, 68, before it was officially consummated. But it was that 67 legislative session that essentially laid the groundwork for the merger. And so the whole thing was completed in just about a year, a little over a year, the whole thing, and there were some close votes. And we don't really know to this day. I don't think many of us here know. I can't say that I know why it was managed this way, because I don't see I didn't see any terribly efficient organization in the drive. I saw a lot of enthusiasm on the part of a lot of people who felt that this would save the university.
Was the urgency for change that we needed it now, or was it just that this was the way to do it? It took, as you say, about a year.
No,
and it may take 5 years, 10 years often in many places. Here it was so rapid.
Urgency was that the University of Omaha was going to collapse financially unless we could get the state appropriation. And I think the legislature saw that. It seems to me that they understood that, and they decided that this was a proper move for the time.
Did we attempt before we work toward merger, let's say, we, collectively, whoever did, to first get state money without becoming a part of the system?
Oh, yes. In fact, we had a little bit of state money under a bill which had been passed early in 1967 to give state aid to junior colleges and to the University of Omaha. We got some state aid from a special bill, but that was a stopgap measure. That was temporary. There was a good deal of talk among faculty people here on the campus of achieving a independent state university, a state university with a separate board that would not be tied to the university at Lincoln. And most of the people on the legislature who were specialists in education advised against that. They felt that could not be achieved. There were a few senators who were for that, but they seemed to feel they were in a hopeless minority and that we could not achieve two independent state universities in Nebraska.
Do you think, as you reflect on it afterwards, that might have been better? Or was it fine?
I always thought it would have been better, but I also always thought that it was not achievable, at least not in a short period of time.
Mm-hmm. Why do you think it wasn't achievable?
Well, simply because I think there were too many members of the legislature who had ties of one kind or another with the Lincoln campus, and they did not want to set up a rival. They felt that if they set up a second campus under the Board of Regents with a single president, that they would not be the opportunity for rivalry. They didn't want to see a rival to the University at Lincoln, and of course, because of the large population in the Omaha area, a separate university could have developed into a very formidable rival.
Yes,
this is possible.
Well, now, in all those years, you were not at that time a part of the faculty. You had then moved into the administrative realm of the university, hadn't you, Bob?
Yes,
What year was it again that you became dean?
I've been dean since 1960. I was appointed dean, that was 8 years before the merger was finished, so I was dean during all the years in which the merger was talked about and consummated.
And so you had an appreciation of it that you probably wouldn't have had as a normal, average, everyday faculty person at that time.
Well, being in the administration, of course, you knew more about it because the deans were so frequently called on to testify.
Yes.
In the legislature because they were the second line of officials who could support the president and back him up, and the regents, and so this was the reason that I was probably a little bit closer to it than the typical faculty member would be.
Well, in 1960, you became a dean. What were some of the changes in your life that happened because of that? It was quite different in some ways, in many ways perhaps, than being a member of the faculty, an administrator among faculty people, department head, things. You've done a variety of things, Robert. What was the progression? You came in a professorial role, teaching what you liked to teach. What were the steps you went through to arrive at that level?
Well, I didn't see that, I don't really look at it in terms of steps. I simply was one of the senior faculty members. I'm not exactly sure why I was selected to be dean. Of course, Mabel L was in the habit of making his own choices. He asked for some faculty advice, but the faculty did not have the voice that it would have today in selecting a new dean. The chief voice was the president's voice. I had certainly not been one of Mabel L's close personal friends on the faculty, if indeed he had any. He was the kind of man who tended to keep a little apart from his faculty, at least on a social basis, but I couldn't consider myself as being close to him personally in any way, and I have always felt that my selection was due largely to the fact that he thought I could get along with quite a large number of the faculty. I had a lot of faculty friends in various departments, and I think that he was looking for somebody who needed somebody who he thought could get along with a large majority of the arts and sciences faculty, which was then, of course, well over 100.
Well, yes, by now the faculty had grown quite
Mm-hmm.
sizably, hadn't it?
That's true.
Yes.
And the only administrative job that I had of any duration was the directorship of the freshman English program. I had done that for 10 years before I became the dean, and I had served as chairman of several committees. I was chairman of the library building committee, which helped design the old Epley Library in the mid-50s, and I had been for several years chairman of the University Honors Committee, which had developed a small honors program in the College of Arts and Sciences, things of this sort. But I don't think it was my administrative experience as such, so much as it was the fact that he felt, rightly or wrongly, I never really knew for sure whether he was right about it, but he felt that I could get along with quite a few members of the faculty.
Now, this wasn't forced on you. I'm quite sure you, Robert, made a decision to do this.
Well,
you've been teaching for a long time. You've involved. What are some of the things, if you could even remember, why you decided, well, I'll be an administrator
I didn't
for a while?
seek the job at all.
No.
The job came to me. I don't even know, to this day, I couldn't name one person who might have recommended me to the president. I couldn't name, I could guess some who might have, but nobody ever came to me and said, well, I was one of those who recommended you for dean. Nobody ever said that to me, and I didn't attempt to draw anybody out on that. So I don't, I didn't seek the job. I would have been very happy just to continue as a professor of English.
Which you became again after some years.
Which is what I came here to do.
Yes.
But the reason I took the job, aside from the fact that it was a challenge and a new thing, was that I had seen other people brought in here as deans, and I was actually afraid that we might get somebody from outside who wouldn't turn out to be terribly compatible with our faculty. I would have felt very badly if we'd gotten a dean who didn't work out for the faculty's point of view, and then I'd look back and say, well, I could have had that job if I'd been willing to take it. And so I decided, well, I'll give it a chance. And but I went to him and explained to him, to Dr. Bale, at the time I accepted the position from him, that I wanted it understood that my resignation was available anytime he wanted it, that he would not have a difficult time getting rid of me if he found out that he had gotten the wrong man, because I had not had that kind of administrative experience, and I was not certain in my own mind that I was the right man, but I was happy to give it a try and see how it worked out.
And as you saw how it worked out, and you tried it, and you stayed with it a number of years, I guess, secondly, how did you like it? And we might reflect a little on that.
Well,
but first of all, as you see it and as you performed it, what was the role of dean in those days? What did you literally do from day to day? What was your major responsibility, and how did it all operate?
The major responsibility of a dean, at least in this institution at that time, was to keep the faculty as happy as possible. That is, to retain the good faculty members, to find the right kind of new faculty members when there were vacancies, and there often were. I had to deal with the hiring maybe of 15 to 20 people with replacements and additions each year during the deanship there, and I had to work closely with the chairman of each of the departments in filling positions. But the job really was a job of keeping the faculty relatively happy, because nothing can destroy a university faster and more completely than an unhappy faculty, a disgruntled faculty. It just won't work. And so this was my number one priority. The second priority that I had to keeping the faculty as content as possible was improving the academic program. I didn't have very much to do directly with students, because the second year I was dean, I was permitted to have an assistant dean who handled the academic problems of the students. Of course, the dean of student personnel handled the disciplinary problems,
yes.
but we appointed to that position Dr. Gordon Hanson, who is still there. He is still in the position of assistant dean under the present dean, and we were very fortunate in finding a man who was a psychologist and who really understood students, liked students, and could talk to students. And so he handled the students' academic problems, and I did not have as much contact with students during my deanship, nearly as much as I had had before when in my teaching career, because with the college as big as it had gotten, we simply felt that one man could not handle faculty problems and student problems both.
Now, as it grew and changed, and as you moved away from attachment to students, this is probably one of the first assistant deans we had on the campus then.
Probably the first, yes, because this was the biggest college, and the others all, of course, later, slightly after that, they all got assistant deans. But
now, as you mentioned too, a part of your role in those days, and I'm quite sure it continues in the current administration too, was to deal with innovation and change and adjustment in the curriculum patterns and the academic life, really, of the college. What were some of the things that stand out in your memory, Bob, that you initiated, that you started, that you continued, that you expanded in the way of programs within the college?
Well, oftentimes when department chairman retired or left for one reason or another, we used that opportunity to look into the departmental programs and see what we needed and what we could do. And there were several departments during those years that we built from very small departments to sizable departments, and increased their value to the institution and their service to it. Two departments I think of that were most notably increased both in quality and quantity during my deanship were philosophy and journalism. Philosophy and journalism had been one-man departments not too far in the past. I think the second man in philosophy, Dr. Payne, had been the philosophy department, and I think the second man, as I recall, was hired in the first year I took over my deanship. Now, journalism, of course, had been in the old Applied Arts College.
Yes.
And so when the Applied Arts College, what was left of it, was changed into an engineering college, then journalism, of course, had to find another home. And the logical place for journalism is right where it is now, in the Arts and Sciences College. And journalism was a two-man department, or I think there were 2.5 people in it at the time. I think that one of the people was part-time, but it was a very small department which did not have the faculty necessary to have a strong major program. You couldn't do it with that few men, and so we built up the journalism department. And when the chairman of the department resigned in the 60s to take another job, then we looked over the whole thing, and we brought the present chairman, Dr. Cowden, in here and built up the journalism department from that point until it has become now, I think the present dean would say that it is one of the strong departments in of course, it is now a part of the communications department. It has enlarged itself, and by being combined with with speech and broadcasting into the communications department. But I think this is one of the things that I feel the most satisfaction is what I was able to do with that important department.
Now, one thing you mentioned earlier in our hour together, Dean Harper, was the student. The student in the early years, when you first came, didn't impress you too much. There were things about him that you felt that we were getting, in general, sort of the leftover student.
They were pretty lackadaisical.
Yeah.
They were the students who couldn't afford to leave home to go to college. Your average student would like to get away from home when he finishes high school. That was just as true then as it is today. These are the students who could go to college for two reasons. One is their parents allowed them to live at home, and the second is there were plenty of part-time jobs in the Omaha area. It was an industrial, commercial area that offered all these part-time jobs. And so these are students who could not have gone to Lincoln unless they could have been good enough to get scholarships. They couldn't have gone to Lincoln because they couldn't have afforded to get away from home.
Now, as we moved into those years where you said earlier, Dr. Hanson took over much of the student relationship, but where you looked at the student, certainly in a larger way, from a different seat as dean. Did you start to notice any major or minor shifts in levels of quality of students, and if so, why?
Well, the big change came, of course, with the merger, because they could go here in Omaha and get a University of Nebraska degree. And a state university degree anywhere, anytime, regardless of the individual institution, a state university degree sounds better than a degree from a municipal university. Most municipal universities, and there are practically none of them left anymore, most of them are small and underfinanced. This has been the history of municipal universities and municipal colleges throughout our country. And state universities have always had stronger financing and stronger popular support. But the big change came right with the merger, because then students began to say, well, why go down there to Lincoln when I can get the same thing here? And in many departments, they could get the same thing here.
One other thing, as we draw to the close here in some of our time together, before we move into your years right now as we're recording this of retirement, I think I'd like to have you reflect a little on the liberal arts. You've been involved with that for much of your life as a teacher and as an administrator, a researcher. Has the pattern of objective and overall aim in that area of concern changed a lot as you've seen it? And if so, have you liked what you've seen and been a part of it?
No, by and large, I don't like what I've seen. I've seen the liberal arts here in the last 15 years. I've seen the liberal arts decline in popularity among students, most notably in the humanities areas, in preference to vocational schools. Now, I think you know that in the last few years on this campus, the College of Business Administration has become the largest college in terms of majors, in terms of the number of students it graduates. It's become the largest college on the campus. 15 years ago, I would say that arts and sciences had maybe 3 times as many graduates as business administration. So this is not a local thing at all. This is if you read some of the educational journals like the Chronicle of Higher Education, you notice this is a nationwide thing. There is a tendency today to feel that making a good living, making money, and is very, very important. And in an age of inflation like this, you can understand it. I mean, it's understandable. I'm not saying that this is wrong. I'm just saying that to a humanist and a liberal arts person, this is a little bit sad, because most of us in liberal arts, whatever our individual fields are, tend to feel that a strong general education underpinning is terribly important to the future health of our society. That doesn't mean that you can't that it isn't important to make a good living at all. It simply means that there is too much, from our point of view, that is the point of view of those of us who have dedicated our lives to the liberal arts, is that the trend right now, and by now I mean the last, say, 5 or 6 years, have been running strongly toward vocationalism. And most deans of liberal arts colleges are concerned about it and a little bit saddened about it. Not they wouldn't change back. The history has been a swing back and forth.
I was wondering what you thought the future might suggest to you.
It depends on the main social currents. When I would say when the economy stabilizes, if it should ever become as easy again for a college graduate to get a job as it was in the 1950s, then I don't think they'd be too concerned. But now they feel, and I might feel the same way if I were an undergraduate today, they feel now that they've got to get the kind of education that is saleable in a very, very tough job market. Yeah. And that means things like business, accounting, engineering, some areas of journalism. I mean, these are the vocational things that are where jobs are available to them. Teaching, no. Enrollments in public schools all over the country is decreasing because of the demographic picture, and it's a bleak decade ahead for people going into teaching, whether at the lower schools or the college level. And take a field like history, philosophy. Typically, people specializing in those fields have gone on to graduate school and have intended to teach those fields because those are where the job opportunities have traditionally been. Well, when those dry up, then what is a poor history major to do? The business world wants people with more specialized training. Yes. What are they to do?
Now, as you look back over the many years that you've been involved in the liberal arts, in the teaching of English and in research, if a few things just stand out in memory, what are the most satisfying and most pleasant and rewarding experiences you feel you've had over the years?
Well, the most satisfying experiences that I've had certainly are experiences involving individual students who were outstanding in my undergraduate and graduate classes, whom I have been able to watch go on and achieve their goals, whatever their goals may be, achieve their ends, and do these things. The real test, I think, of any professor, the ultimate test, is how well his students finally do in the world. Has he helped to inspire these students to do well? And when I find that there are a sizable number of people who have been students in one or more of my classes and whom I recognize at the time as students with very high potential, and have watched them go on and do the things that they wanted to do, achieve these things, whether they were going into the academic world, whether they were going into law or medicine or whatever. It's these students, and in my case, there are several dozen of them that I would remember specifically, whom I've found out in recent years have pretty much gone on and achieved their goals, at least for their age levels.
And in their achieving their goals, you've at least partially achieved your own, haven't you, Robert?
I would think so, yes. This is the way I have felt about it. I feel that the reason the study of literature, which is my field, is so important is not simply because it's a way to train other people to teach literature to younger people, but because it gives you an insight. The understanding of great writing, whether it be essays or fiction or drama or poetry, the great writing opens up doors. It shows you what life is, and nobody knows more about the human experience than the great writers. I mean, you start with the greatest. In English, of course, the greatest writer, the pinnacle, is always Shakespeare. And every single human problem, every human conflict that you can think of is important, is to some extent developed in one or more of Shakespeare's plays. In other words, if people who are great readers are people who tend to have great insight into life, because the great writers are the people who have the great insights into life. And so I feel that that literature primarily is a road to understanding life. That's the big value of the field of literature. There are vocational values in it, sure. People do become good teachers. They do become good writers as a result of the study of literature occasionally, but it's more than that. It's this insight that it gives.
Well, speaking of insight and greatness, it reflects some of the time and the strength you've given to this university in the years you've spent with us. Now, I thank you for that on behalf of those who are my colleagues who shared these many years with you, and I thank you especially, Robert, for being with me today.
Well, I'm very happy to have participated in this program.